I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV, Velocities and Music, the best kept secret in music reviews. Now, today, we're going to review an album called Everyday Robots by a guy named Damon Albarn. Now, you may or may not be familiar, or may not be aware that you're familiar with the extensive backlog of Damon Albarn's works, but Tom is.
I love Damon Albarn.
He's a god.
I love that man.
He is a god.
I know. He was in Blur, which is like my favorite band. He was in Gorillaz, which is freaking awesome. He's been in several other projects as well, Good, the Bad, and the Queen. He produced Bobby Womack's latest. I mean, the guy's just awesome. He's involved in a lot of stuff. And one of the most interesting people in music. It's true, because he's very diverse. You know, we were talking a little while ago about, musicians who are involved in a lot of different projects, kind of like how Damon Albarn is. But a lot of times they sound, they kind of hover around the same, genre or appeal to the same demographic. I feel like throughout Damon Albarn's 20-plus year career, he's really been able to hit a lot of different, I don't want to say markets, because that makes it sound commercial, but you know what I mean. Yeah, genres. He appeals to many different crowds. Yeah. He can do just about anything. Yeah, he pretty much covered the gamut of rock with Blur, and then got into, indie electronica and hip-hop with Gorillaz. And throughout all this, this guy's been active now for this is his third decade of making music, and he has never once put out a solo record before Everyday Robots, which just came out. Yeah. So, how does this record compare in sound to any work that he previously did? Well, should listeners go in expecting what they heard from Blur or expecting Gorillaz? I think pieces of it. In the sense that this album, Everyday Robots, is a little bit more beat-based, almost bordering on trip-hop at times. You heard a little bit of that on Blur's last album, Think Tank. Right. You heard it more in Gorillaz. Right. I actually think this more closely resembles the kind of production he was doing on Bobby Womack's album.
I agree.
From the beginning, the first track, the title track, Everyday Robots, you put that on and there's kind of like a sample of a guy talking. And then when the beat comes in and those strings, I feel like I stumbled into a Portishead album.
Yeah, I totally agree.
That mood, it's down-tempo. I've heard a lot of people describe this album as a whole as being very melancholic. I don't entirely agree with that. I think there are tracks that are like that. But like the first few tracks, for example, Everyday Robots, Hostiles, and Lonely Press Play, I don't think they necessarily sound like sad tracks. They're just kind of down-tempo, chill tracks. They focus on those very thick, very separated beats. You have very punchy and well-defined bass. It's not big, flabby hip-hop bass, but it's just very tight and nicely placed in the mix.
And track 4, Mr. Tempo, I don't think you can make the argument that that's really a down...
Oh, no, not at all. No,
lonely track.
That's a more upbeat, kind of worldly track.
Yeah, and lyrically, it's almost has this, Sgt. Pepper, the Gay Parade vibe, where it's about, a character almost. And that is one thing I think that this album, does present, is you hear Damon Albarn, who is traditionally, a very positive dude. Yeah. Being very introspective in the lyrics at times, this whole album just has a general vibe of loneliness overall. There are those moments that I think that it escapes that, like on Mr. Tempo and a couple other tracks. But I feel like Everyday Robots. That song hits you pretty good. It's like it makes you think. And the thing is that lyrics play such a big role on this record. I think certain tracks definitely play are good because he crafted the lyrics to a very specific message that works with the music so well. And Damon is an incredible songwriter, so he knows exactly what he's doing and how to bring you into the mix. What I found was really cool is, you mentioned production. The production on Everyday Robots is by far, I think, the most standout attribute of the sound. Yeah. Everything here is just immaculate. The bass, the bass beats, when those come in, whoa, it is powerful. This is an album that gets better when you listen to it on good speakers.
Oh, definitely.
And you get to hear a lot more of this stuff that's going on in the background because Damon is such a keen songwriter. He knows that background noises mean everything. It's all about the background melodies, these synth melodies that he's putting in, these textures, even sometimes just little samples of everyday noise that he's putting in. You know, it gives these tracks a sense of life
very much
to them. Not to mention, he writes great vocal parts that I think just make these songs really catchy.
Now, you talked about the production a bit. The production is great. I think that sometimes, I think that on track by track, it is definitely the most noticeable attribute. It stands out. It packs a punch. I think that at times it sounds a bit homogenized throughout the entire album.
I would not disagree.
And that is my biggest complaint, is I think if you pick out any of these tracks, they're all going to be good. There are certain ones that clearly stand out above others. Jake and I pretty much pick the same tracks as highlights, which... See, we've been doing this long enough that I find that usually when we pick the same tracks, it means it's not an entirely well-rounded album.
Yeah, it means that there's a little bit of track displacement.
Yeah.
There's definitely tracks that I think if Tom and I are agreeing on track picks, you guys will probably like those same tracks. And it means that those other tracks just might not have been, they might not have been bad tracks, but where the good tracks are here, the other tracks might be down here.
And just to kind of pick those out, we both picked Lonely Press Play, The Selfish Giant, Photographs You're Taking Now, and The History of a Cheating Heart. Not to say the other tracks are bad, but let's take a look, for example, at a couple of them, like Hostiles, for example. I thought was a good track. Actually,
the chorus melody I absolutely love.
Yeah.
The rest of the song is not quite as strong to me, but the chorus is just fantastic.
True, and then I would compare that with Hollow Ponds, track 8. I think that there's a lot of similarities between those two tracks, but personally for me, I thought that Hostiles accomplished it better.
I totally agree, and it kind of makes Hollow Ponds, which it just kind of makes it just a little frivolous.
Yeah,
like, why even have it on the album?
Why do you need it? And I think so. I think that if you're going to have a lot of tracks that sound kind of the same, are using similar beats, or even you could even do similar beats if the elements that you're putting into it don't sound exactly the same. But I found a lot of the kick drum sounds, a lot of the snare sounds sounded kind of the same, and so then you construct them the same. You have a foundation for two tracks that are very similar, and that's just what I found in certain places on this album. And so that kind of repetition, but not consistency and quality, brings it down a little bit.
Yeah. You know, we talked about production. It's worthwhile to note, I think, that Brian Eno helped produce this album. At least helped. I mean, he also participates and is featured on track 7, You and Me, which is a very expansive track. It's probably one of the more experimental tracks on the album. Quite frankly, it's the longest track on the album, and I didn't like it all that much. I felt like in the first couple minutes, it had run its course, and it's 7 minutes long. And, you know, also he featured Natasha Khan from Bat for Lashes on The Selfish Giant, which I wish she had a bigger role in that.
Yeah, me too.
She provided vocals, but you can't really, it doesn't really stand out. Overall, this record had a tendency to feel long to me. Tracks like You and Me, Hollow Ponds being, you know, repeating kind of what you heard on Hostiles, but then he tried to albumize this a bit too. He put in a couple interlude tracks, and I just feel like while he tried to albumize this, I would have rather, you know, albumization is great if there's a general balance between all of the songs. But here there's clear standout tracks and clear tracks that just don't hold their own weight against the other tracks. So the whole album listening experience is already contorted, so adding those interlude tracks doesn't really help the listening experience at all. In fact, it really hurts it because you're just adding length to the album. This record did feel long to me. I wasn't a big fan of the last track either. Those baritone, you know,
Brian
vocals.
Eno.
Right. It didn't sound good to me. Now some parts, you know, like when Damon Albarn starts singing in that song, it's really good. But you know, that song, it just felt off to me. I kind of wish that they would have just ended with The History of a Cheating Heart. I think that would have been a really somber, nice way to end. I mean, it's a very personal song, and I think it would have just set the tone right.
And I actually think that the reason he probably ended it with Heavy Seas of Love is because that song has a much more optimistic vibe to it, and probably that ends up being kind of the end of the story he's trying to craft. But as we always say, even if you're not making a concept album, if you're trying to be thematic at all, and the music suffers to have to follow that, then I kind of just described it. Right. You know, the music is suffering for it. And I think that happens a little bit here. I still enjoyed this album overall. I love Damon Albarn. Obviously, he's had better work, but I mean, he's had a career that's hard to top.
But this is definitely not one of his best albums.
No, I wouldn't say so at all, but it's still enjoyable. I'm just glad to hear him making music, and I'm always looking forward to what he's going to do next, especially if it's another Blur album. Record another Blur album, damn it! It's about time.
I concur.
Yes.
Tom, score.
I'm going 79.
Okay, I'm a little lower than you just because I think I'm more sensitive to the whole album listening experience. I'm going to go 76 on this one, which makes this a 78 from Velocities to Music. That's a mark of a good record. One that we're not necessarily in love with. It may have a couple things that we would have wished were better, but one that you guys will probably really like. So please, if you haven't already, go out, listen to Everyday Robots by Damon Albarn, and let us know your thoughts. If you like this in comparison to what he's done in the past with Gorillaz and Blur, we'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Comment www.velocitiesandmusic.com or youtube.com/velocitiesandmusic. Now, as always, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and let us know what albums you want to see us review on this channel. I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV, moving music critique forward.